Welcome to Building the Future. I'm your host, Kevin Horick. You can check out new episodes of the show every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. If you missed an episode or want to get more information about the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com. Season 1 of the TV version of Building the Future is now streaming online at buildingthefutureshow.com. Welcome back to the show. Today we have Nathan Beckord, co-founder and CEO at Foundersuite. Nathan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. I think what you're doing is really interesting. You have quite the impressive background. You've been in the game for a while. You have quite, you've done a lot of things. But maybe before we kind of cover Foundersuite, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Sure. I grew up in originally a very small town in the mountains of Colorado called Estes Park.
Okay.
And then I spent my teen years down in Boulder, Colorado. Pretty cool college town.
Okay. And then what did you kind of, or I guess like as a kid, what kind of got you passionate about technology?
You know, this is in the day where I had Apple IIe and floppy disks. I mean, this sounds probably so ancient.
No, that's what I grew up on in the 80s. I love that.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, it's such a thrill. We had a little group of us that had, our 5 1/4 inch floppy disks, and we would like copy pirated software for like Castle Wolfenstein,
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, all this fun stuff. And it totally just, it's kind of addictive to be able to get a computer to do something like that you want. And that was the bug. That was the initial bug.
Sure. So you graduated high school. What did you kind of take in university?
I came out to California for university. I went to Santa Clara University here in Silicon Valley, and I actually took a little different tack. I studied finance and business.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So what kind of decided to go kind of in finance and business?
It was exciting. It was, to me, I was attracted to the exciting go-go 90s when a lot of companies started to go public, and a lot of the tech companies were having IPOs and doing acquisitions and all that good stuff. So that was what was appealing. And I went into finance, and I went into investment banking, where I was covering tech stocks and writing research reports, stock reports on tech stocks, and working on a few IPOs and whatnot. And that kind of got me a bug for the whole startup thing.
Sure. So you've had kind of a number of different jobs and kind of doing a bunch of different things. What kind of eventually led you to starting your own thing?
Yeah, so I think I always was pretty entrepreneurial, even as a kid. I used to, a little anecdote, I used to order Chinese throwing stars and other paraphernalia through like the back of martial arts magazines and then sell it to kids on the school bus, whose parents wouldn't let them order that sort of stuff.
That's funny. That's awesome.
It's amazing what little kids will pay, or your classmates will pay if something's forbidden to them, but your parents are a little more lenient.
Sure.
So I had a little entrepreneurial bug early on, but I think basically when I was working in Wall Street, covering these tech stocks and writing these reports on tech stocks, I had some friends that were starting companies here in San Francisco. This is again in the 90s, when things were pretty going, haywire, going crazy.
Sure.
Bubble 1.0. I had friends that were starting companies, and they're like, "Hey, you're writing these reports on these tech companies. Can you help me write a business plan? Because I want to go raise money."
Right.
At that time, it was how you raise money. You would write a business plan and put together this 30-page document, and very different kind of model. People don't do that anymore, which is probably a good thing. But I started writing business plans for friends, and helping them on their fundraising. So that got me a little closer to the actual, early stage startup game. And then from there, it just sort of sucked me in and never let me go.
Sure. So what led you to kind of starting and kind of co-founding and being CEO of Foundersuite?
Yeah, so continuing on that story, so I was doing stock research for a while, and then I went off to get my MBA in Austin, Texas. And in Austin, I joined up with the Entrepreneur Society and had this idea that I was going to start a startup while in graduate school.
Okay.
Yeah. Good, safe place, right? It's kind of a safe place to fail if you're in school. You know. I spent about a year and a half negotiating for a license to commercialize some technology out of what's called the MD Anderson Cancer Center. It's a network of hospitals where they do clinical trial tests, to test different drugs for cancer drugs and things like that. And the MD Anderson had built this software to manage all these trials. Very complex, very lucrative market, right? Because drug companies will spend a lot of money to develop new drugs, and
Sure.
the software to manage the trials is a very critical part of that. So that was the idea I latched on to. Didn't really have a passion for clinical trials, but was attracted to the market and spent a year getting a license for this thing, negotiating it, very complex negotiation license. Spent another period of time putting together a real early team, starting to talk to investors. And at the end of the day, basically a week after graduating from B school, it all fell apart.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, long story short, the market was good, the concept was good, the software was actually old and crappy. It had been written over 20 years by these guys, so it was pretty outdated. And the guys who had created it were, very nobly more interested in curing cancer than they were in starting a startup. So the thing kind of imploded. I had no job. I had no startup. I had missed all the on-campus recruiting that they do at B school. And so with no real options, no real opportunities, I said, all right, well, let's just go back to San Francisco and start, consulting, hang out a consulting shingle.
Okay.
And so I did that, and and that was about 2002, where I started, taking what I had learned in B school and running the startup and stuff like that, and helping startups with their pitch decks, their models, putting together their financial structure, and did that. So that grew into an actual business called Venture Archetypes for about 10 years.
Wow, that's awesome.
It was really fun. I mean, it was really fun. The consulting thing is very mentally stimulating. I wouldn't mind doing it again at some point because you're working with, 6 or 10 or 12 different companies at once, solving problems, putting them in front of investors. It's very stimulating. I worked with some pretty cool companies like Kickstarter when they were very early, and a few others, in the 2007, 2010 timeframe that were doing some cool stuff.
Sure. That's awesome. So at what point did Foundersuite kind of come to be?
Yeah, so in the course of running this consulting business, we built up a lot of IP.
Okay.
We had, I have a folder of 100 different models and templates and various pitch decks that we'd recycle for clients, right?
Sure.
One way to make money consulting is obviously to reuse and recycle your IP. And a lot of times we come into a startup and help them put together a model, help them put together a pitch deck. Then we, get them coached on their pitch and get them practicing their pitch and all that good stuff, get them kind of ready to go raise money. And then we go and we put together, or we do research and put together a list of investors for them.
Got you.
And that was pretty labor intensive. And then we'd also even go a step further and usually create a nice big custom spreadsheet to manage all these discussions. So you probably see where I'm going with this. We
Totally.
kind of said, all right, this is good stuff. Let's actually turn this into software instead of having it all be based in Google spreadsheets and stuff. Let's actually productize this. Um, and so we built some apps. Foundersuite was a subsidiary of the consulting business, Venture Archetypes, and we put it out there as kind of a side business, if you will, or side concept. Spent another, I guess, about 2 years actually getting feedback on it and making it a little bit better. And then finally, in 2015, early 2015, decided to spin Foundersuite out into its own company. We incorporated it in January of 2015, and then raised some money for it last summer, June of 2015. So it was a real company.
Gotcha. No, but I think that's awesome. And like partly, obviously, like I think what you guys are doing with Foundersuite is really cool. But just when you and I originally met, I loved that kind of like journey of how, you basically took some stuff from your consulting business, kind of turned it into a product. You had a failed startup, right? So you've been down the road, right? And you've had tons of experiences, and you basically never gave up. And then you kind of, you took this thing, and then you're like, well, I could productize this. And I think like that's really inspirational to a lot of people, because there's a lot of people out there that are maybe trading time for dollars, right? Like you do in consulting. Sure. Where you could probably spin some of that stuff off into a product and maybe not necessarily commit to it full time, but maybe eventually it becomes full time, or maybe it becomes its own company, like you did with Foundersuite.
Yeah, I think it's a good approach, right? The clinical trial software stuff, had really no passion for that. It was not something that got me fired up and excited and motivated to crank away and brainstorm. When you're onto something you're really passionate about, your mind's kind of working on all the time, right?
Right.
And that's when you're maybe on to something, or at least something that's a good fit for you. Whether or not it's a successful company, that might be a different issue. But when your mind is constantly thinking about something and you're obsessed with something, right? When you've figured out that obsession about something, it's a great way to kind of put it out as a side business, see if anyone cares.
Sure.
And if they do, that might be a good signal that it's time to turn that into a startup. Yeah.
Sure. So what exactly is Foundersuite, just for, people listening?
Sure. So it's actually evolved. I'll give a slightly longer.
Sure. No, that's interesting.
When I, backing up, rewinding a bit, when we put out a suite, it was 5 different web apps. It was an app for idea validation, one for fundraising, one for investor relations, one for managing your PR, and then one for tracking competitors. And the concept was sort of this end-to-end suite of tools that you would come on at the idea stage, use it to hone your idea, then move on to the fundraising stage, so on and so forth.
Got you.
And that was what we put out there. That was kind of our shingle. After we raised money last summer, we really took sort of a 2 or 3 months kind of step back from the business a little bit and said, all right, what do we want to do? We've got a little money in the bank now. We looked at analytics and talking to users and figured out that really what people were using us for was the fundraising piece. Some of the other things were interesting, but not really core and critical. So we decided to, this is about last August, September timeframe, kind of really double down and focus in on the fundraising piece. So we started rebuilding our investor CRM. This is a tool that helps you build a target list of investors, and then as you're out fundraising, it helps you basically, it's a SaaS business. It helps you keep on top of all your discussions and meetings and calls and notes around your fundraise.
Sure.
So we spent from, say, August, September, up until about March of this year, 2016, rebuilding that investor CRM. Um, Launched it in March, basically ground up rebuild, and that's our flagship. About a month ago, we started to actually trim and kill off some of the other products. The media CRM tool I mentioned, the idea validation tool, those are going away. And what we're really doing now is focusing on, again, that fundraising piece, and then also investor relations and kind of the deal management side of things. So Foundersuite today is investor CRM. We also have a collection of pitch decks and models and templates, things that are around there. We're pretty close to releasing an investor update or investor relations tool.
Okay.
And then we have a few other things in the pipe that are all in the same general category.
Okay, so walk me through kind of, I'm looking for investors. I come to Foundersuite. You have a free plan. How do I kind of, just high level use the tool?
Yeah. It goes to our philosophy, and this is a philosophy both from experience and also from just talking to a lot of different founders, that when you decide it's time to go raise money, you need to kind of switch your mental gears and think of it like a sales process.
Sure.
Because that's really what it is. You're selling shares in your company, you're selling your vision, you're selling your team to investors who are buying shares of the company.
Right.
So that's kind of how we think about it, and that's how we've built this tool. So you come in, the free plan, you can come in, you can search by industry. The first step, of course, in a sales process is to build your funnel. First step of that is to build a list of target, leads. So you come in, you type in your industry, say it's drones or e-commerce, and we display investors that are interested in that industry.
Oh, very cool.
And yeah, it's pretty useful. It shows a little picture, a bio. We're pulling from AngelList API some data. We're showing like picture, bio, location, also all their social icons like LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, blogs. And so you can kind of scan these investors who are interested in e-commerce, for example.
Right.
Open up their social profiles, and if they look like they're a good target or lead, one click, you add them to your investor board.
Got you.
This investor board is like a Trello board or a Kanban board where you have columns filled with cards. Each card represents an investor, and the titles of the columns would be things like new, contacted, pitched, due diligence, said yes, said no, right?
Got you.
And long story short, you're moving these cards in between the columns as you're kind of driving all these investors towards a yes or no, like a sales process.
Sure.
A few other kind of bells and whistles. When you click on a card and open it up, you can assign an owner, maybe your co-founder. You can enter in, like, if the investor says, I'm in for 200 grand. I'm in for 200 grand if you bring in another lead investor. You can put in 200K and a 50% conditional commitment level. You can upload your pitch deck. You can log your meetings and notes and calls. So it's very much a real CRM in that way of, keeping a log of the activity of your fundraise.
Sure. So you keep mentioning kind of like docs and stuff, and I know that's kind of in more of the paid plans. But what kind of other docs, like you mentioned pitch deck and whatnot, but is there anything else that you guys are kind of promoting in the startup docs area?
Yeah, the startup docs actually has quite a few things in it. We have, I think we have about 9 different folders and close to about 100 different docs and templates spread across those 9 different folders.
Okay.
Like one folder is starting up, and these are things like founders agreement, naming your company template, cap table builder, right? So you're going to
Sure.
divvy up equity, stuff like that. In the funding folder, we have, like I mentioned, pitch decks, templates, term sheets, a valuation scenario. You can plug in if I raise $2 million on a $5 million cap, and then I later raise $10 million, you can see how your equity gets kind of whittled down.
Got you.
Yeah, pretty interesting actually. Um, and things like that. So that's in the funding template, cap table, and term sheets and pitch decks. And then the other folders are things like there's a marketing and PR. I think there's a hiring one. There's a analytics and planning. So this has some good stuff. Like there's a hiring planner template. This is Excel-based templates. This is a list of about 50 different job roles organized by category: engineering, marketing, sales, operations, with job titles. And then it's a spreadsheet where you can assign a salary and just plug in. You're going to hire 2 engineers in March, another one in August, and it shows you what your monthly burn rate will be as you hire and scale. So that's a nice, useful template.
Totally.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff like that. So it's really just kind of nuts and bolts templates for running a startup.
Sure. No, I think that's awesome, because I think in a lot of cases, depending on your background, you don't really necessarily know where to start, or maybe you know where to start, but at some point you don't really know where to keep going, right? Where with you guys have kind of outlined almost every step from kind of beginning to, I guess, end or being sold, right? Like is kind of what you guys are basically putting together for somebody for a monthly fee. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah, it's funny. The as I mentioned, the original vision of Foundersuite was this like end-to-end suite of not just templates but tools to help you do like every step of the process. And although I love that vision, that's really almost just too big a bite to chew for a startup. I think it's a great vision, right? Like it would be awesome if there was just this all-encompassing platform to help you like start, scale, grow your company. We have a lot of that,
Sure.
But it's not all that. I think the templates kind of encompass that whole spectrum of getting started, fundraising, marketing, hiring. Our tools, our software tools, are really focused on the fundraising piece.
Sure. What's the founder's market piece?
Oh yeah, so this is a newer addition. So the concept is, kind of going into pitch mode here. Concept is you're a new startup. You come on, you use our templates, the getting started templates, the founders agreements to get going. Then you're ready to fundraise. You use our software to do that. Once you raise money as a startup, the pressure's on to scale. And
Sure.
Typically you start opening up with that checkbook pretty aggressively, and you start paying for accounting and payroll software and, all recruiting software. You start spending that money to scale. So in Founders Market, we've assembled a collection of products and got discounts on most of them, free trials and discounts. And they're really just things that we use ourselves and
Gotcha.
that we recommend to others. So it's kind of a curated collection of about 25 deals on, payments, recruiting, all kinds of good stuff.
Sure. No, I think that's awesome. So, and maybe this is kind of a question that you might get all the time, but is there any kind of like, is there target markets for startups that you guys are kind of targeting, or is it kind of anybody that's looking to do hardware, software kind of startups, or who's your target market for Foundersuite?
It's everyone. I know that's pretty broad. It's anyone who is a startup that wants to scale. It's
Okay.
not for your, mom and pop corner delicatessen type of startup. But we do have consumer product startups. We have a lot of software and actually a lot of like hardware too. We have relationships with a bunch of different incubators and accelerators, and just thinking of a few of our more active users right now. We just did a profile of a company called Foldymates, which
Okay.
they were in Plug and Play Tech Center, and they just graduated. They actually have a machine that you would put next to your washer dryer. You put in your laundry, and it folds it all for you,
Oh, I
right?
read about that the other day. That's awesome.
It's totally cool, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
kind of like pretty smart. Your next big white appliance, or what do they
Sure.
call it? I mean, everything from that to, your typical software and gaming and mobile startups. It's funny. I've seen a few hemp or cannabis-based startups, come across the platform recently. Like
Okay.
you can almost kind of mirror trends by seeing like who's really actively fundraising on the platform. It's kind of fun.
That's actually really interesting. That actually might be fascinating in itself, right? To see almost like what's going to be the next hot thing in startups. You can see, what people are doing, what they're looking to get funding and that thing. That's interesting.
It is, and it has been. There's been a lot of robotic stuff lately, so
Okay.
it's kind of it's cool because these things are always really interesting. We had a wave of drone related
Sure.
startups come through, maybe a year ago, and now we're seeing a lot of robotics things.
Okay. Any AI or virtual reality stuff?
Yes, I've been seeing some AI stuff. VR, maybe not quite as much. I'd have to go and look. I don't think I've seen too many VR things come across the platform, which I don't know why we'd have AI but not VR.
Uh,
Yeah, I'll have to go back and look at that. It's kind of a good question.
sure. So I'm kind of curious, and obviously you don't have to give me like away anything that you guys are really building, but where do you see kind of the future of Founder Suite going?
I I still love this original vision of being this comprehensive platform for entrepreneurs.
Okay.
I think entrepreneurship is definitely a booming wave. It's got many years to go before we hit peak saturation of entrepreneurship.
Sure.
Um, we're seeing a lot of millennials and college grads wanting to be entrepreneurs, not follow traditional paths. So I still love this vision of this comprehensive end-to-end suite of tools. So I think to answer your question, we'll really continue to focus on the funding and investor relations piece for the near term, really nail that piece, and
Sure.
then probably expand outward from there. We have some ideas of other tools, and we might even rebuild, just like we did with our investor CRM, where we did a ground up rebuild. We might rebuild some of the other products that we killed off.
Got you.
Like our media CRM. When you're pitching journalists, it's conceptually similar to pitching investors. You're building a list of targets that are relevant for you, relevant journalists that are relevant for your business. You're engaging them, you're building relationships with them, you're pushing them to write about you, right? It's conceptually similar process. So we might rebuild some of those products like that.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think you're right. So I'm curious then, is there anything, this is maybe a little bit outside of Founder Suite, but is there anything that you see kind of all the time that you could give almost like tips or advice for people when they're looking to pitch to investors? Whether you've seen it kind of through your past career or, Founder Suite.
Yeah, oh, there's so much. I will try and pick some of the best. I
Sure.
think raising money, and can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Was this coming? Okay. Raising money is really hard. It's harder than it looks. It's much more painful than it looks. The perception is you just start talking to investors and it starts to happen. The thing I see, even on our platform, is that successful startups really kind of treat it as a numbers game, as a sales process, as a numbers game, where the larger number of leads in the top of your funnel, the more likely you are to raise money. There's maybe 1% of startups out there that have such amazing traction and metrics and Y Combinator pedigree and Stanford CS engineer pedigrees that they don't have to hustle their ass off, right? That's
Gotcha.
1% of startups. The other 99, 98% have to work really hard at it, right? So I see startups on here and I see how much time they're putting into it. And, I'm looking at actually our Intercom dashboard as we speak, and I'm seeing the number of web sessions some of these companies have, which is in the, hundreds, many hundreds, right? That means many hundreds of times they've come back and edited an investor, added investors. Some of them have 200 or 300 investor leads or targets on their dashboard that they're working through. So I think understanding that unless you're in that 1% with these Snapchat type of growth rates and whatnot, understanding that you got to put in the time, effort, and really work hard on your fundraise is just a good thing to understand and accept. And then once you kind of accept that, putting in the time to build the target list and working the network and relationships to get the warm introductions is pretty key. Also understanding that it's going to be pretty much a full-time job for 2 to 6 months, sometimes longer. Hopefully, if it's going longer than 6 months, you might consider taking a break, coming back at it when you've got more traction or momentum. But that's always eye-opening to people that they need to carve off. They need to get their co-founder to kind of manage the reins of the business so they can really focus on working all these investor connections and leads. Other things, just general kind of guidance. Obviously, having a great pitch that's been well honed, well refined. You don't want to go out there talking to 50 investors when your pitch is kind of crappy and not resonating, right? Is pretty important. It's hard to come back and get a second meeting. It's hard to make a first impression a second time with investors, right?
Sure.
They get so many startups coming across their plate that they're often looking for the fastest way to say no, right? So it's hard to come back if they said no later on. Let's see, other tips. Trying to keep the momentum up when you start to get that momentum. I was just talking with some startups that were in batch 16 of 500 startups incubator that just graduated recently. And one of them was really interesting. He's like, I thought I had it in the bag. I thought I had our funding round closed. He started to take his foot off the gas pedal, and one or two of the guys he thought were in didn't, pan out. And his funding round kind of lost momentum right at the end, right? So I think that's sort of a takeaway, is just keeping the pedal to the metal all the way until that money literally is in the bank.
Sure. No, I think that's really good advice.
Pushing it over the finish line, not close to the finish line.
Sure.
What else? And then, just kind of an obvious statement, but the more business momentum and traction you can drum up and get going before fundraising, the faster and easier fundraise is going to be. If you've got those metrics, that really does help. If you can present that slide in your pitch deck showing really exciting metrics and growth, that gets a lot of people excited.
Yeah, no, totally, right? Like if you can prove, even if you have a little bit of revenue coming in and whatnot too, right?
Yeah. I guess that's actually a good point too, is, especially if you're raising a real seed round or Series A round, having, your analytics and metrics down pretty cold in terms of like, cost of acquisition, revenue per user, all that good stuff.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. But Nathan, we're kind of running out of time. Maybe let's close the show with mentioning where people can find Foundersuite online and any other social media links you want to mention, either for Foundersuite or yourself.
You bet. Foundersuite is just at foundersuite.com. That's foundersuite.com. We're also there on Twitter and Facebook. Same thing, Foundersuite. We'd love you to come give us a shot. If you need a discount code, and if you can remember my name, it's Nate25, capital N, lowercase ate 25. We'll take off 25% for about half a year.
Perfect. And that's
awesome. That's it. We're really engaged with our users and love to get discussions going with our users. So we love feedback. We love questions. We love to stay close to our customers. So if you do give us a shot and play around with us, don't be shy in reaching out. We're pretty responsive.
Perfect, Nathan. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you and kind of following your guys' progress throughout the rest of 2016 and beyond.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate the time and the platform, and let's keep in touch.
Yeah, sounds great, man. All right, have a good rest of your day. We'll talk soon.
Thanks.
Okay, bye. Thanks for listening. The music for the show is done by Electric Mantra. You can check them out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.